Hello from Romania. Unfortunately, we are really confronted these days with the dangerous divided world. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine are under a brutal aggression by Russia. The Cold War changed into a hot one. This is a danger for the entire humanity, as there are threats of using nuclear power. We are confronted with security, food, energy crisis. The youth aspirations are jeopardized. The world economy is seriously affected. And the geopolitics became a serious danger for the peace and development. Peoples should be left alone to decide upon its path of development, in the spirit of the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, being so happily observed by ASEAN. YIRSEA is dedicated to contribute to the consolidation of the vivid tendency of approaching between Europe and Asia and Europe, which is the productive way for sustaining peace and development in a divided world. I wish all of us success in our debates.
My fellow global citizens and friends, this year's United Nations Climate Conference in Egypt will be momentous, not only because of its location, but also because of its possible outcomes. We need your support to mobilize collective global action through your governments and non-state actors for strong and urgent implementation of the Paris Agreement. There is no time to spare. Even as we face multiple crises, climate change remains the single greatest common threat to all humankind. Look at the catastrophes worldwide. Vicious heat waves in Europe, hurricanes in Florida and the Caribbean, massive floods in Pakistan, claiming the lives of so many, leaving millions homeless and displaced. Insured losses now top $100 billion United States dollars each year, and uninsured losses are even greater. But although global warming is universal, its damaging effects are not. The burden falls most heavily on the poor in small developing nations like my own country, Antigua and Barbuda. Collectively, small island developing states SIDS contribute the least to CO2 emissions, a mere 0.2%, yet we are facing its existential threats. The very existence of our small islands is fatally endangered. We are the hidden cost of the fossil fuel industry's government subsidies and windfall profits. For SIDS to survive this crisis, we need climate action now. We need global emissions to peak now, to stay the 1.5 degree pathway course with no overshoot. Yet science and experience show that limiting warming to 1.5 degree increase is not safe for SIDS. Our cultures, environments, and economies are on the line. Major emitters must act and act now. We need assurances that the world will move away from fossil fuels and refrain from reigniting this damaging fuse. Not a single dollar should be utilized to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. Renewable energy is the way to secure our future. We need delivery of the $100 billion pledged in climate finance. As it is now, the cost for adapting to climate change is borne by those of us on the front lines, by those of us who least contributed to this crisis. We need a doubling in adaptation finance, as promised, to better prepare ourselves. More mitigation and more adaptation mean less loss and damage. Yet we must acknowledge that there will be severe and devastating loss and damage no matter how much we prepare. There is no dedicated funding for developing countries to respond to loss and damage after a climate event. This is why we unequivocally need a loss and damage response fund. There must be a smooth adoption of the COP agenda with the item on loss and damage funding arrangements included before work begins. This will establish at COP27 a new fit-for-purpose loss and damage response fund with a work plan to design and implement the fund by COP28. Global citizens, these needs are not simply the needs of islands. SIDS have been signaling what is to come. We are the canaries in the climate change coal mine. Our reality, our limitations, our losses are rapidly becoming global realities. Global citizens, we are at the crossroads of climate change and its devastating impacts, requiring urgent action. Funding to address loss and damage has been deferred for 31 years, but should now be prioritized. Climate justice deferred is climate justice denied. We need your support, citizens of the world, to rally all governments and actors for this climate justice cause. With your help, loss and damage response finance can stay on the COP agenda and deliver a new fit-for-purpose fund at COP27. This is the moment for decisive action. I thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Brown. As the Prime Minister mentioned, this is not a crisis of the future. Bold decisions can no longer wait. The Prime Minister outlined a number of asks, from financing fossil fuel subsidies, loss and damage, to name a few. And I have a stellar panel to come to help break down the road to net zero, and how ministers, leaders, and really all of us can join the support and make cause for this ambitious agenda. But before we begin, and as the world counts down to COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, please see this video message from His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Egypt and the President-designate of COP27.
In a year when the focus on the global climate agenda can easily slip away under the pressure of other competing priorities, science tells us that we do not only need to hold tight to our commitments, but we need to do more, demonstrate further ambition, and act swifter and more decisively. Unfortunately, there is a growing sense that the Paris temperature goal is slipping away. The adaptation gap is rapidly growing. Climate finance is significantly lower than needs and expectations. Meanwhile, loss and damage is becoming a recurrent reality that reminds us of the critical need for robust and additional action and support. The heartbreaking scenes from Pakistan and the untold suffering of tens of thousands of victims of this climate calamity, the unprecedented rise in temperature and forest fires in Europe and the United States, all confirm that there is no plan B and that the last U-turn is only a few kilometers away. There is no excuse for allowing the devastating Pakistani floods, or the Adai cyclone of southern Africa, or the shrinking shores of many islands and mainlands to become a regular feature on our news bars. At COP27, the COP of implementation, I urge all governments and stakeholders to double up their efforts and listen to the millions of people calling for an urgent and qualitative response to the climate emergency. As we inch closer to COP27, I urge all countries that have not done so to update their NDCs, gear their development towards a green, low-carbon, and resilient pathway, and agree on an ambitious mitigation work program that premises itself on staying way below 2 degrees Celsius while keeping 1.5 degrees within reach, to also deliver remarkable progress on the global goal on adaptation, thereby paving the way for a transformative adaptation which is impactful and well-resourced, and that developed countries announce new and meaningful financial pledges, including for the GCF and Adaptation Fund beyond the current level, and more importantly, ensure that 2023 is the year where the symbolic 100 billion US pledge is finally honored. Parties should also honor the pledge to double adaptation finance. All parties must work together to ensure a credible outcome that responds to the gravity of the loss and damage, and provide developing countries with means and resources to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. We must all continue to develop and reinforce the normative framework and operational means needed to support the vision of a just transition that does not overlook the relevant socio-economic variables and needs. At COP27, I encourage all of us to get it and do it right and fully.
Thank you, Excellency. So with me today is His Excellency Gustavo Misa Cuadra, who was the immediate past Foreign Minister of Peru from 2019-2020, and now serves as the Dean of the Peruvian Diplomatic Academy. Thank you, Minister Cuadra, for joining us. We also have Muazzam Malik, who is the Managing Director for Global Delivery of World Resources Institute and had a variety of roles, including the Director General for Africa at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Thank you, Muazzam, for joining us. And we have Stig Travik, His Excellency, who served as the Special Envoy for Climate and Forest of the Royal Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, and also serves as Director of Climate, Energy and Environment at NORAD. Thank you, Stig, for joining us. And finally, representing Generation Z, which we've heard a lot about through this town hall, Kasia Sikwa-Slavna, who is the founder of the Global Sunrise Project and the director and writer of the 1.5 Degrees of Peace documentary. Kasia, thank you for joining us. So to begin, I want to first come to Gustavo and ask you a question, because you are renowned for your work leading efforts to end global plastic pollution and to forge an internationally binding agreement by 2024. And so I'm curious, in this stage of seemingly deadlock on the climate talks, what insights do you have for how to bring people together around a common agenda and overcome conflicting interests?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important global citizen talk, and I thank also the foreign policy community of Indonesia. You have touched a very important issue. I remember Peru participating and organizing COP20 a few years ago, and we were in a similar situation where there were divisions and we were not addressing the key aspects that we needed for an important agreement, and we had the following year in Paris. So I think it is possible. And also, as you mentioned, it is possible for this increasing and delicate problem we have in the world, that is plastic pollution, that is also linked to climate change, no? Because for the production of plastics, we use also fossil fuels. So I think there is a possibility right now to complement our efforts in climate change, what we are doing, with this important decision we had at the beginning of this year in Nairobi to negotiate a legally binding instrument. It was approved by a resolution that was presented by Peru and Rwanda, and it was a very important resolution adopted after several years of negotiation. So international community gathered their joint efforts, and we shortened our differences, as I mentioned, and decided to start this negotiation. The first meeting will be in Punta del Este, Uruguay, in the 28th of November this year, and we are looking forward to make an important contribution to the world beginning this negotiation. This treaty is of paramount importance for the net zero emission also, and the green revolution, because the production of plastic and ultimate contamination that it creates throughout its life cycle is one of the most serious threats to climate change in present times. As I mentioned, this resolution also included the idea, the hope that we will promote a sustainable production and consumption of plastics through this product design, environmental science waste management, promoting cooperation and coordination with the conventions while avoiding duplication, encouraging action by all stakeholders, including the private sector, promoting capacity building and technical assistance, also promoting research and development of sustainable and affordable, innovative and cost-effective approaches. As we can appreciate, the mandate of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee from its inception has been well comprehensive and ambitious. In order to prepare the ground for the negotiation process, we had already a preparatory meeting in Dakar, where we decided the rules of procedure, the composition of the Bureau, and the documents to be prepared. We still will define the details of these rules in Punta del Este and also complete the INC Bureau. Peru is well aware of the devastating effects of plastic pollution on biodiversity, ecosystem service, and worsening of climate change. It is necessary that the future instrument should address plastic pollution from a holistic approach, which promotes a circular economy with concrete and ambitious measures. We must also advocate for an INC process that is transparent, inclusive, science-based, and incorporate a human rights approach. Peru has spoken on several occasions to emphasize the importance of the emphasis of these instruments on the means of implementation, because developing countries need technology transfer, financing, capacity building. It will be necessary for the instrument to take in consideration the specific problems of developing countries, as they are countries that face particularly serious challenges. Developing countries generally agree that the treaty will need a robust institutional framework, particularly through a financial mechanism specifically dedicated to the instrument, which allow for stable and predictive funding. Another aspect that is fundamental, particularly for the small island development states, is the issue of already existing plastic pollution and contamination on the marine environment, as many of these states are economically dependent on their sea and beaches for the boost of their fishing and tourism sector. For this reason, Peru has been very vocal on the need for this instrument to explicitly refer to the issue of existing plastic pollution on the marine pollution. Once again, I thank global citizens and the foreign policy community of Indonesia. It has been wonderful to participate here, and also to mention this important legally binding instrument. We'll just start to negotiating at the end of the year, and through this, we will also contribute to the challenge of climate change that is our main concern right now for this this meeting that will take place in Egypt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. And there's plenty of people agreeing with you online and in the chat. And a reminder, please post any questions, and towards the end, we will try and come to a few of them. I next want to go to Moazam, and I apologize because this is quite a big question with many opinions on it. But as we know, one of the biggest issues leading up to this COP, particularly for African nations, is the role of fossil fuels like natural gas in the transition. Many African governments are saying, perhaps legitimately, that they should have the opportunity to sell their natural resources, while Kenya is standing out alongside African civil society groups like Don't Gas Africa, who are calling for Africa to leapfrog fossil fuels and reap the benefits of the clean energy transition. What is your opinion on these divisions, and what does it bode for global climate cooperation, especially in the context of climate financing discussions?
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said at the beginning, I'm Mozam Malik. I'm Managing Director at the World Resources Institute. I was previously ambassador in Indonesia, so it's great to be associating with this forum again, having been there in person some years ago. And it's very exciting to see more than 1,000 people tuning in for this and participating in this discussion. This is the kind of activism that we need to see, particularly with young people. Just before I turn to your question, I wanted to sort of underline that the headline for this session is the question, is a net zero world possible? And I believe it is possible, though, as our opening speakers outlined, the Minister from Egypt and the Prime Minister from Antigua and Barbuda, it is on life support. The target of a 1.5 degree world is on life support, and there are incredible challenges. And I hope through the course of this session we'll get a chance to explore some of those tensions. But here at WRI, and indeed in line with assessments of most other, indeed almost I think all other credible commentators, our assessment is that new gas exploration is not compatible with a 1.5 degree world. Global gas production has got to decline. But also at WRI, we believe that the burden of reducing fossil fuel production and consumption should be borne by those that have historic responsibility for climate change, and indeed have the greatest capacity financially and in terms of technology to make that transition. So this is a burden that needs to fall particularly with developed countries. Now, in terms of countries in Africa and indeed in other developing countries, there is an active debate about whether gas can be used as a transition fuel. And I think that's a debate that one needs to engage with very, very carefully. But I want to underline maybe at this point that there is no grounds here for hypocrisy. Right? I talked about countries which bear historic responsibility taking the lead, and in that context, you know, for the UK, for example, to be issuing new exploration licenses in the wake of the energy crisis in Europe is frankly outrageous. Really, I think a bit of a shocking move, and damages the UK's credibility that has been built up in the climate change space over a long period of time. But again, turning to Africa, I think African countries, a number of African countries do have hydrocarbon resources. There are some careful choices that they need to make. But I think as they make those choices, putting aside hypocrisy and Hippocratic calls from elsewhere, as they make those choices, I guess from WRI's perspective, and indeed my personal perspective as a citizen, I would urge responsibility. Responsibility in terms of the challenges that we face internationally and globally for climate change, and indeed acting responsibly in terms of the longer term interests of their own citizens. Now, we know that with new gas developments, that there is a real risk of creating stranded assets. These are huge investments that take a long period of time to develop. And the pace at which the renewable energy industry has developed shows that there are real risks that these huge investments may indeed become stranded assets and uneconomic within the coming decade or so. Again, on the renewable energy side, we've seen rapid decline in prices for solar energy and indeed for wind turbines. These are now economic technologies, indeed competing with historic fossil fuel, indeed outcompeting historic fossil fuel investments. And indeed, as Kenya has shown, it is entirely possible to really build an energy sector that is largely comprised of renewable resources. Now, as we look at this, I think there's a real opportunity here for African countries in acting responsibility to skip a generation of technology. So in the way that with mobile telephony, a lot of countries around the world have skipped landlines, I think there is similarly an opportunity to meet energy access requirements in their countries by skipping development of fossil fuel industries and moving straight to renewables. But in order to unlock that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on policy, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on finance. The policy and the financial frameworks that apply in a lot of developing countries, and indeed developed countries, are very rooted in the technologies of the past. They're catching up fast and indeed modernizing, and we're seeing great developments on the renewable side. But particularly, I think in Africa and some other developing countries, there's still a lot of work to do on policy. And globally, there's a lot of work to do on finance to try and ensure that the financial flows are there domestically and internationally to accelerate this transition to renewable energy. I think it's in this context that this idea of just transitions is really important. So at COP26, we had this very significant agreement around a just energy transition for South Africa, with a number of countries coming together to back their transition away from coal. Progress has been made over the last year, but I think most people would agree that progress has been slightly slower than we had hoped. So there's some promise there, but still a lot of work to do. I think the last part of your question was in terms of what this means for global cooperation. And this is clearly one of the litmus issues alongside loss and damage and finance more broadly that will play out at COP28. And there's a real risk of kind of geopolitical tensions here, pulling us apart on these sorts of agendas. And I think it's going to be a tough discussion on some of these issues, but I'm continuing to hope that we will find the space to collaborate, because the global challenge that we face requires that degree of collaboration and responsibility. So I hope to see developed countries continuing to phase out fossil fuels at an accelerated rate, in fact, a far more accelerated rate than we are seeing now. And I would hope to see very, very limited use of fossil fuels and gas in African countries and other developing countries. And indeed, I would hope for skipping a generation of technology and moving straight to renewables, as indeed Kenya has shown us can be done.
Thanks, Mozam. And I think your comment, Nevertop, about there's no room for hypocrisy, and this being about follow through and commitment and genuine partnership is resonating a lot with many people around this global town hall, and hopefully we can come back to that. Stig, I want to come to you now, because investing in nature-based climate solutions and addressing deforestation is critical to achieving a net zero world. Yet we know there are different views on the way these solutions should both be funded and brought to scale. And so can you break this down for us, the critical role it plays on the road to net zero, and assess whether we are making progress or backtracking?
Thank you, Michael. As you said, I'm the Director of Climate and Environment in the Norwegian Development Agency. So we're the government agency executing Norwegian development policy. This government has decided to really try to merge climate and development in everything we do. I think it's an excellent question. Let me just first point to something that Mozam underlined, and that is the role of finance. And I think in all of the transitions that we want to do, there are huge upfront investments that need to be made in order to reap the benefits further down the line. So finding ways to release innovative finance is key for progress. So in terms of forest, what we have seen is that politics, policies, laws, and the implementation of laws is what matters most. Money helps, but money helps mostly in a situation where there is a clear determination to reduce deforestation or to protect existing forests. And that is why we have decided to partner with countries that have ambitious policies on protecting their forests. So when Norway first decided to go down this route, it was based on commitments made by countries like Brazil, Indonesia, Peru, and others that have vast tropical forests. In terms of how to deal with it, we are pretty convinced that it's only at a larger scale that it makes sense to invest heavily in protecting forests. So I know that some people think that it's better to protect one piece here, one piece there quickly, and to get finance to those. We think that helping governments that actually have made the decision to protect forests at large is much more effective. And it's more effective if we have agreement on what the ways to measure should be, and that more countries get together in order to finance those policies to protect forests. We also want to get private finance into this space, and I think this is what we have done through the LEAF coalition, where governments guarantee a minimum price for the carbon countries save by protecting their forest, and then getting the private sector in as well. The other area, which is of course very important, is those countries that have historically low deforestation and high forest cover. They have been very vocal that we have the forest intact. Other countries should support us, and we agree with them that is very important. Another aspect of this is, of course, the role of indigenous peoples. It is clear that most of the intact forests have indigenous peoples in them, and wherever indigenous people have rights, forests are better protected and are more stable than in areas where they do not. I think another area which you will see coming much more, and I see that I'm running out of time, but it's the linkage between tropical forests, drylands and savannas, and agriculture. And I think this, in terms of this COP, adaptation is a very important issue. And we heard the call from countries earlier. So Norway has decided to triple the amount of climate funding that goes towards adaptation to try to answer some of those calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig. And there's a few comments, particularly in the context of the recent Brazilian election, which we might come back to in the conversation, I'm sure. Kasia, I want to come to you. Last but by no means least, the 2020s, for a variety of reasons, may well be the most consequential decade for close to 100 years. On the one hand, it's the decade where we must avoid catastrophic climate change, and yet the threat of war and even great power conflict is alive and well, perhaps more than ever before. How are these two issues connected, and what solutions have you found in your work as a filmmaker, and particularly at the grassroots?
Thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, my generation is dealing with multiple existential threats, the impacts of which are not a future problem, but a present reality. Climate change, conflicts, and militarism are connected, but I can give a few examples of the ways that it manifests. The US military, for example, is the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels globally, contributing greatly to climate change without the responsibility to report their emissions. The entire war system, from uranium mining in indigenous communities in the US to testing nuclear weapons in the Pacific, to military vehicle emissions and jet fuel consumption, are all destructive to the natural environment, but also to the people in the communities in which these are taking place. Likewise, as the climate crisis worsens and intensifies, the severity of drought, the flooding, the food and water shortages, the unprecedented numbers of migration, these are all risk factors which increase the risk of violent conflict erupting. As humans, we've really seen ourselves as above nature historically, to exploit as we please, to treat nature violently. Just as in conflict situations, we've seen ourselves as above other humans. And my question is, how long can we continue to treat our planet and its people violently before it's the end of humanity? As a filmmaker, I've really gotten to know young people who are living at the nexus of both of these issues, young people who have lived with the legacy of nuclear weapons testing in their communities, who are at risk for their islands flooding, who are dealing with the droughts and flooding, who are dealing with the food and water shortages. These young people are seeking out solutions to bridge peace, disarmament, and climate justice movements. And for them, it's impossible to see these issues as disconnected. And where we see that disconnect is in convincing policymakers sometimes to look beyond the frame of their own experience, because these connections are so complex. We often think about them and address them in a compartmentalized manner, as if they're separate from one another. In order to move beyond these silos, we have to bring the most impacted to the table and give them the power to influence decisions. They are the experts of their own experience. And some of the demands that I've heard from young people who are at the nexus of these two issues is to obviously move away from our dependence on fossil fuels and extractive industries, to hold militaries to account for their emissions and destructive environmental practices, which are impacting people and ecosystems. And also something young people want is divestment from systems of violence, choosing to invest in infrastructures that enable the conditions for peaceful societies and a just green transition. For 30 years, which is longer than I've been alive, world leaders have convened to mobilize action on climate change. My question is, why has it taken 30 years? We can no longer keep putting this future reality on the back burner, because this is our reality now for so many across the world. And young people, people across generations, we all deserve peace and climate justice now. So we must address the two together in our action. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kasia. And before we finish, you must update us when the film's being released and the process so we can all watch it. But I want to come now to two additional panelists to add their reflections on what they've heard so far and to pose questions to the four of you. The first panelist we've got is Fabian Budi Pascal, who is an executive board member of the Indonesian Diaspora Network. Fabian, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so we have been talking about actions and funding, but there's one more thing that needs a very serious attention, which is the mindset of the global citizens. We need to have a correct mindset about that understanding about the gravity of the crisis, what we are having now. We need to have the right mindset that there is only one planet. There is no planet B for us. We also know that there is a saying that God forgives, man may forgive, but nature never forgive. I think this kind of mindset we must put together as a guiding action, guidance for our actions in the future. So I have three questions here. First, that I'd like to address to Mr. Traffic. So as we know that the carbon in our atmosphere already exceeds the upper limit of carbon stability. Our present pace and common efforts to avert the climate change consequences are far too slow and too little. The world, therefore, needs to act more decisively and more urgently, both in governmental and private sectors. My question is, between market forces and government program, which one would be more effective? My second question is to Kasia. There is a line that we don't own this planet, but merely borrow it from our children. How far the world has been responding to the young generation's serious concern and efforts on climate change. My third question goes to Ambassador Malik. Yeah, about the Russia and Ukraine wars. This war has been transforming the global energy landscape in a negative way by, among others, reimagining coals as a necessity choice of present energy source, while coal, as we know, remains the fossil fuel that does the most damage to our planet. The question is, how should we in the future make up such costly climate losses we suffer from the war? That's all. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Al-Hassan Hossan Al-Din Abdullareem. Al-Hassan, over to you.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Hassan Hossan. I'm a student from Asyut University, and I'll be representing Moink Asyut. So I'd like to start off by saying it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you guys. So the issue of climate change is a major issue around the whole world, and in Egypt we've launched several campaigns to spread awareness about it. In Asyut University, we started a campaign called Green November to inform people about the dangers and effects of climate change. And there are many projects around Egypt that hope to transform it into a more green government. We've built several wind turbines and solar power plants, and there are several more on the way. There's also the High Dam, which has been a major supplier for Egypt's renewable energy sources since its construction was completed in 1971. So there are many more projects underway, and hopefully with them we will become more greener than ever. So I'd like to now share my concerns related to climate change. When the issue was first brought up, the first thing that came to my mind as an Egyptian citizen was farming and agriculture, simply because Egypt was built on farming. The Egyptian civilization started when a group of nomads settled on the river, or on the banks of the River Nile, and it started that way. So farming was the basis of our civilization, and till this day it plays a major role in our economy and lifestyle. So we basically started by modifying our irrigation system to make it preserve as much water as possible. And this brings me to my next concern, which is the River Nile itself. Like I said, it played an essential role in the foundation of Egypt. So I'm concerned that with the increased temperatures and continued drought, that it might be in risk or in danger. So we've started by lining the canals and modifying our sewage network system to make it change from an open channel system to a closed channel system. So these are my concerns, and I'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts on what extra precautions we might take to prevent such fate. And thank you.
Thank you, Al-Hassan. So essentially, I'm going to throw it to each of our panelists. I'm going to go reverse order. So Kasia, prepare yourself. And Fabian, I might just get you to repeat the question to Kasia, because just to make sure she got it. But before I do, there's some questions on how the grassroots can get involved. And just a reminder, on the Global Citizen app or on the QR codes you're seeing, there's actions on all of these issues that people can take ahead of the COP27. So do that to get involved and make your voice heard. But Fabian, if you wouldn't mind just repeating the question back to Kasia again.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So there is a line that we do not own this planet, but only borrow it from our children. Question is, how far, as you know, the world has been responding to the young generation's serious concerns and efforts on climate change?
Thank you for your question. I believe that young people have really mobilized on a mass scale to bring attention to the urgency and seriousness of climate change as it's impacting them on the ground. I think it's showing that since the climate movement led by youth has really taken off, we're still seeing a lack of commitment. we're not meeting our climate targets on time or on track to meet our climate targets. And I think that shows how seriously leaders are taking young people's concerns. I know that it is a complex system. I know that it is difficult to address all of these policy concerns, but if we were truly hearing the concerns of young people, if we were truly inviting them to the table to influence policy, to be engaged stakeholders, then we would be, I think, further on track to meet our climate targets. And I have to say that young people are really critical to this process because, as you said, we are borrowing this planet from our children, even myself, my future generations to come. I have to think about them and their future generations. And not only, like I've mentioned before, think about the future generations to come, but think about the people who are suffering now, the young people like myself around the world, my peers who are seeing the impacts in their communities. So we really do have to reflect on that and connect to that. We can't let our experiences be disconnected from that of our fellow human beings on this planet. So yeah, thank you so much for your question.
Thanks, Kasia. Stig, I'm going to give you the floor next to respond.
Thank you, Michael, and also thank you, Kasia. I think you're very right, both sort of on the moral imperative side, and I think also we need to make sure to include young people, and you see it on every level, including that the youth wings of most parties, wherever they are much more forward-leaning on climate issues than their mother or father parties are. I would also ask Fabian to just repeat the last part of the question, because I heard market forces and then it was cutting a little bit. So Fabian, could you maybe just enlighten me what am I to compare market forces to?
Sure, thank you. So there are two elements, market forces or government programs. So between these two, which one do you think will be more effective?
Okay, thank you. I think it's hard to compare, yeah, but I think both are necessary, and especially if you look at the value chains on food and other commodities, you need both in order to make sure that you have the change you need. So you have, of course, consumers, producers, and governments. I think that you cannot really get anywhere unless you have good policies on land use. If you have bad policies on land use, valuable nature will be destroyed in order to be converted to soy or palm oil or something, roads or something else. So I think you do need that part. You also need to promote business that produces in a way which is kind to the planet and kind to the people who work in the production. I think we need the consumers, the young people, the activists as well, to tell governments and to tell business when they're not producing in the right way. So I think you need all of them. I would also like to make one reflection to Alhassan's comments. Really, thank you, Alhassan. I hope I'll meet you in Sharm el Sheikh next week. I will be there from Wednesday mornings. I hope we come across each other. You pointed to agriculture, and I think it is an extremely important point. And this is the time we really need to take care, because we need to prepare. We need more climate robust agriculture. We need to protect forests in order to have rains for our agriculture, in order to have water for our agriculture. And we need to produce in a more biodiverse way, which is kinder to nature and kinder to people. So we really need to find ways to promote more smallholder participation in value chains so that the diverse production that they have can be enjoyed by more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig. Mozam, over to you.
Sorry about that, little technical glitch there. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Fabian and Al-Hassan. I think there's three things I'd like to say. The first is that Fabian talked about mindset, global citizens, one planet. And I think this is really critical right now. We're living in a very, very fractured time with real geopolitical tensions, not just arising out of war and conflict around Russia and Ukraine, but actually war and conflict in other places, climate injustice, injustice in terms of the response to the COVID pandemic, which is not completely behind us, and indeed deep-seated poverty and persistent inequality. And the critical question for us, I think, as we go into COP27 is whether we will see the solidarity and actions by all parties to try to build trust. And that approach, that mindset that you talked about is absolutely critical for the future of the planet, but also the future of the people who live on this planet. Secondly, you asked me specifically about Russia and Ukraine and the impact that has had on energy markets. Now, in Europe, where we had been blazing a trail, frankly, on renewable energy, the energy crisis arising out of that conflict has really set progress back. And we've seen European countries, other developed countries, turn to fossil fuels, buying up LNG supplies, these licenses for exploration that the UK government has issued that I referred to earlier. And this is frankly a very major setback. And I think for all of those of us who are concerned and feel the urgency of the climate change debate, not only is this a setback, but even perhaps more shockingly, this is a missed opportunity, right? In response to this crisis, we know that renewable energy works. We know these technologies. We know that the prices are falling, and we know actually that the investment and the lead times for these are better than fossil fuel developments. And so to have turned to the old world and to the old markets and the old solutions is frankly shocking, disappointing, and I hope that developed country leaders, as they go into the discussion in Sharm el-Sheikh, will really feel the press of that, the need to really run to the future rather than to grab the security of the past. Now, we've had a number of countries say that these are transitional measures, these are temporary setbacks. They're still committed to their 2030 objectives and their 2050 net zero objectives, and that is laudable. But the work that we've done at WRI tells us that we are way, way behind. We are not on track for the 2030 targets. Indeed, for 2030, our assessment of NDCs is that we will have emissions reductions of 7% by 2030 against 2019 levels, where in fact we need 43% reductions by 2030. We've been tracking 40 different indicators. We are way off track. Almost none of those are on track. So, the conflict is bad, but actually we need to see renewed energy and a run to the future. I also want to respond to Al-Hassan's question on agriculture, and I'm not an expert on the River Nile, so I'll hold back from commenting on that. But agriculture is a critical issue, right? So agriculture and land use generates about 25% of greenhouse gases. We're on track to see overall food demand increase by 50% and animal-based food demand increase by 70% as the population, the global population, grows 7 billion in 2010 to about 10 billion in 2050. So agriculture is a huge, huge issue. Now, we, with other partners, produced the World Resources Report in July 2019 titled Creating Sustainable Food Future. And I'd encourage you, Al-Hassan, to get hold of that. And that tries to chart a different future for agriculture based around 5 ideas. The first is reducing growth in demand for food and waste in the food sector. The second is increasing food production without expanding agricultural land. The third is protecting and restoring natural ecosystems. And there's a big challenge here, particularly in Africa, given this is the African COP, for the Congo Basin, and we'll be really pushing for restoration efforts in the Congo Basin at this COP. And the fourth is increasing fish as a source of nutrition. And lastly, reducing greenhouse gases from agricultural production. So this is a critical issue, and thank you for raising it.
Thank you, Mozam. And finally, I want to come right back to Minister Kouadra and hear your reflections and thoughts. You might need to mute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for the opportunity. I think that all the challenges we are having regarding the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the difficulties to achieve the goals we have already committed is something that is very important for the ones that we are involved in new processes, no, like the one I mentioned regarding the plastics negotiation treaty, particularly because in this case, in the case of plastics, we are aiming to the whole cycle of plastics, no, from the design, production, consumption, to waste management, disposal of plastics. So we are going to have numerous challenges in order to how to measure improvement in this important goal we have for ending plastic pollution. The resolution has been very wise and being so broad, no? Because in order to tackle this big challenge the humanity has regarding plastics, we need to tackle all the stages of the plastic cycle. And I think the more we learn about how the implementation of this agreement is also very important for this process we are just starting. I think it's feasible, no? And the way the international community gathered to approve the Paris Agreement is an inspiration in a way, but also we need to be very careful in terms of how to be sure that these high expectations also deliver, and we don't face in a few years' time these same challenges that we are having in the implementation of our goals. It's very important for this reason, this link and this complementarity I have raised during my previous intervention. Thank you again.
Thank you, Minister. And I just want to thank everyone online. The chat is alive and we're all reading your comments, and we'll get to some questions quite soon. And I just want to give a big shout out to everyone in Southeast Asia and on that side of the world. I know it's past midnight, but I can see from the flags, there's still plenty of people from the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore who are with us. So thank you for staying with us and tuning in. Next, I want to go to Germany, and I want to go to Danny Ralph Vogel, who has a question from Germany. Danny, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello from Germany. Currently, we are in transit in Vienna, so we have strong connection problems with the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, apologize for that. But we madly wanted to attend, and because the topic is too important, because it's not one of the most important goals and mission in human history and mankind. It's the most important mission. So we madly wanted to attend, and we wanted to give our opinion about the solution and how we see that. So we have to make clear again, net zero world. It's a balance between the amount of gas we produce and the amount of gas we take away of the atmosphere. I just want to make it clear, of course, for everybody, this is clear, but mainly the current status quo in the world, two main political systems and two main law systems, completely different, the civil law and the common law, which impede this very important goal and this necessary mission. So, and there are currently too many different interests of governments, countries around the world, which different priorities, but unfortunately, a sustainable environment and a net zero world is too often not set as even one of these priorities. So according to the experience and knowledge of DGA, the German Jurist Academy, educate always the next generation of lawyers, legal professional, always open-minded. This is one of our main goals. And we build and research on legal tech, AI, artificial intelligence. There's a big disruption ongoing in the law industry. And this is part, or the most important part, that will help to reach one of these goals. I come back later to that shortly. So, and the knowledge and to not know the underpinnings of these two completely different law systems, common law and civil law, it's not only necessary, it's extremely important to work with that and to use it for the future for legal tech AI as well, because you have to work with different specialties of different disciplines, and not only one lawyer or law-educated legal professionals as is in the past. So we all have to learn to work better together. And so this is one part, and DGA as well helps and supports foundation, for example, to build in countries who need that constitutional states based on democratic principles and rules. So according to the experience and knowledge of DGA, the key for this to solve this problem or to reach this goal, this most important, is law. And currently the international law is too weak to enforce that. So we have to reform or to replace first in completely new, we have to enforce that, a completely new international law, or a valid for all mankind, for all countries, the United Nations, to enforce this goal, or even to open this road to achieve this most important next milestone for mankind. So, because law is the only work and the tool to enforce that, because military inventions and all other non-democratic or unconstitutional acting or inventions, of course, are never a solution, and we have to enforce it. So law is the key, and but we have first of all to reform the current international law, because this is too weak, and we do our part to achieve that. So there are a lot of important things to do. And yes, we try to do our best and to do our part. But this is the key to do that. But for that, we have to enforce all countries in the world. It's a long road, but it's possible. But this is, according to us, the only way currently. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny, and thanks for joining us, especially when you're on the move. We really appreciate it. I want to throw it open to our panelists. That was a very specific question, but an important point around international law. Stig, I might come to you first if that's okay, only because you've told me I'm allowed to pick on you. And then if any of our other panelists would like to jump in and also make a comment, please do so. But Stig, to you first.
I think several points were touched on by Danny, important points. I think he pointed the importance of law, both domestic and international, and the potential of new technologies, in particular artificial intelligence. I would agree. I mean, law is extremely important, as we have seen in a number of countries, that developments in law, for example, in protection of indigenous people's rights by law, makes a difference. Then, of course, also implementation of the law is important. So the willingness and force that a government puts behind implementing and upholding the law is important. Then I think in any change, I mean, the political economy around change is extremely important. There are, of course, economic, political, social forces that shape the reality we're in. and we know we need to change. And there will always be changes painful, and it's especially painful for the people who need to stop making the money the way they are used to. So it's about law, it's about making a socially and economically just transition for those who need to change, and about creating new and different laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Mozam. Do you want to jump in here as well?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of quick comments. I mean, I agree with Danny that developing legal frameworks in this space is really, really important. But I think I go back to our discussion previously and the challenge of creating trust. So, we've attempted to see international law developed in a whole range of areas over the last couple of decades. And some progress has been made, for example, with the ICC and other kind of international jurisdictions. But equally, we've seen aspects of existing international law come under real pressure. So I don't disagree that we need to build international kind of legal frameworks to try and deliver environmental justice. But I just caution that the foundation of this has to be to deal with some of the geopolitical issues, to create the climate of trust that allows countries to come together and to collaborate in this space. And that's a long, hard road. I think there's also work to be done in the domestic legal space in terms of legislatures putting their international commitments into domestic law in forms that governments are, as they change in democratic systems or indeed other systems, are really forced to deliver. So I think there's work both to be done internationally and domestically. There was another aspect that Danny raised that I just wanted to comment on, and he referred to the fact that governments face too many different interests and priorities, environment being just one of those. And I think that's actually a very, very important point. In far too many of the conversations that I have internationally and have had over the last couple of years, it's clear that people still, despite all the work that has been done, still believe that there is this false trade-off between prosperity and the environment, between serving citizens and the environment. And this is a false paradigm. And really, we need to look at how we can frame addressing the climate challenges that we face squarely as central to addressing the wider interests and priorities that our countries and our peoples face in all our countries and around the world.
Thanks, Mozam. It's interesting, in addition to legal frameworks, one of the things I've been paying close attention to is the role of regulation, and specifically around some of the corporate commitments that's been made to the net to zero, and whether or not public declarations actually live up to the actions being taken. And I think, seeing regulators get more involved both in Europe and the US will hopefully in time improve the integrity of those commitments and hopefully boost public confidence around, when you hear corporates making net zero commitments, are you actually decarbonizing, or are you just offsetting somewhere with cheap carbon credits? So I think it's an important question, Danny. Just before we move on to public questions, Gustavo, is there any comments you want to make very quickly? In less than a minute? Okay, great. Well, let's go to the public commentary, because we've had some great questions. And I'm going to go through, list them all, and then invite each of our panelists to say a few words and tie in their closing remarks as part of that. Firstly, we go to Kevin in Indonesia, who has said, with Brazil's recent election result and President Lula's victory, are we moving forward with our climate agenda? Do we think more climate progressive, climate aware leaders will be elected in the near future? What can we do to ensure that? We then have a question from the Africa Youth Growth Foundation. Is the global community looking into any possible replacement for our plastic bottles with environmental, climate-friendly bottles? We have a question from Patrick, also from Indonesia. He said, I would like to ask the panelists the following question. How do you project and foresee the direction and result of COP27? What do you hope COP27 would effectively implement? And I might just add on to that, a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, as COP26 was wrapping up, then COP President Alok Sharma said 1.5 degrees, we leave Glasgow with 1.5 degrees alive, but it's on life support. Do we think we will still be able to say that in 2 weeks' time? And what do we need at a high level to be able to continue to say that? So with that, I'm going to throw to our panelists. And this time, Gustavo, I'm going to come to you first. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, regarding the first question, I think that what we are all aim at is that these commitments are not only to be achieved by one government. We need to be sure that this is a national commitment that could not be hindered by changes in government. So we hope that in the case of, it was mentioned, Brazil and others, these commitments will be respected and improved and developed with any kind of government. So we hope, you mentioned the question was regarding the recent election. We hope that each election can contribute, and in this case, the change of government in Brazil could help additionally on new measures, the implementation of the Paris Agreement. The participation of Brazil is extremely important. As you know, it's a key country in Latin America. So we all hope that there will be positive development for this treaty.
Thank you, Gustavo. Mozam, I might come to you next.
Oh, thanks. So I think Lula's election is really very significant for the Amazon. I referred to the Congo Basin earlier. The Amazon is the other critical biosphere, the biome that needs massive international attention. And Lula's election is very significant in that respect. And I think his attendance at COP27 is potentially also very significant as we go into this. And we've talked about the geopolitics and the trust and so on. I think given his previous experience, his profile on the global stage, and his kind of climate awareness and commitment to action, I think Lula could bring a little bit of unexpected magic into the conversation in COP27. I hope that's not me being wishful, but I think it's a little bit of something different that we hadn't anticipated a few weeks ago. So I'm excited about that. In terms of the COP27 question, what do we hope to see in 1.5 degrees? Is it on life support, and what do we need to see to keep it on life support? I think it is on life support. It's getting increasingly precarious. In terms of what do we need to see happen at COP27, the big attention will be on the issues of finance that we talked about earlier, loss and damage, certainly whether there's an agreement to move forward to talk about a mechanism for loss and damage. I think the prospects for that are looking better than they were even a few days ago. We do need to see the 100 billion coming through. We need to see commitments to adaptation finance coming through. And it's not just about existing commitments. Actually, we need additional finance over the coming years. There's some important work that's been done under the New Climate Economy banner, which shows the scale of resources that will be needed over coming years. So I think there'll be a lot of attention on the finance question. But I think in order to keep the 1.5 degree world on the horizon, actually alongside the finance, we do need to see an acceleration on NDCs, both in terms of commitments made, because not enough countries have come through since COP26 on the promise of more ambitious NDCs, but also an acceleration on implementing existing commitments in the NDCs. As I said earlier, we are well off track for 2030. So accelerating progress against NDCs is absolutely critical. And then thirdly, accountability. Michael, you talked about this in reference to the questions that Danny raised about legislation. I think the legislative question is a broader question about accountability. We don't have adequate systems to track and hold people to account, whether it's governments or corporates, or indeed other stakeholders, against the commitments that they've made. So there needs to be a real press ahead on building systems of accountability. And I think if we had maximalist outcomes on all three of those agendas, we might just be able to walk away saying that the 1.5 degree world is still on life support. I think it's that precarious. But yeah, let's hope that we get the best possible coming out of this next couple of weeks in Sharm.
Thanks for that, Mozam, and that upbeat finish. And, I agree. President Lula, even though he doesn't take office until January 1, the fact he's going to COP, I think will add a different dimension and a much needed dimension. And on loss and damages, I agree. The US seemingly have gone from what might have been a dismissive tone to, I read something this morning saying that they're willing potentially to do something if China is also willing to play ball. So at least that's a start or a foundation to hopefully build upon. But thank you for those comments. Stig, I want to come to you next.
Yeah, I would agree. President-elect Lula has a track record of promoting climate, and was very successful in reducing deforestation in the Amazon the last time he was president, and he clearly has the ambition to do so again. I think on the general question whether leaders, more leaders worldwide will be climate friendly, I think that is a very hard question. You see different kinds of outcomes in different countries, and I think we need to be aware that we're going into a difficult period in many countries. Economic turmoil might focus people's attention on what needs to be done. It might also distract them. As for my expectation for COP 27, I would say also that yes, let's hope 1.5, 1.6 will still be on life support. I hope we will see quite a lot of progress on adaptation. I'm also, as Mozam, a little bit hopeful that we might see some positive signs on loss and damage. And at least if we can get to a place where there is more trust, more hope in relations globally on this, it would be a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig. And over to you, Kasia.
Thank you. I will comment on COP27 as I am leaving for the conference on Monday. Of course, it's been said, but I will reemphasize that meeting our commitments for climate financing, meeting our targets to keep us on track towards 1.5 degrees is critically important. Of course, increasing commitments towards loss and damage funding is also critically important. I know that at this moment, based on prior COPs, young people have been left feeling quite discouraged by some of the commitments or lack thereof. So establishing trust not only between states, but between civil society, between youth, and between states is critically important. So I really do hope that COP will be a platform to establish that trust between youth and states. I want to emphasize that for young people out there, there is so much strength in our collective action in our global community. And I will again emphasize that we have to engage young people, we have to engage civil society and engage those in the global South in the decision-making process. And also, I mean, I'm not seeing it this year on the agenda, but I do hope that conflict and the climate crisis, the intersection of both, will take greater presence on the global stage in terms of our decision-making around COP, because we have to address both together to effectively address climate change and meet our 1.5 degree target. So breaking down those silos is of critical importance at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Kasia. Well, we've got a few minutes left, and so there was one question that came through from Indonesia. How do we push for the implementation of renewable energy in a national, regional, and international sphere? How do we decrease the world's dependence on fossil fuels and finite energy resources? If anyone would like to take that. In the meantime, whilst the rest of the panelists decide, maybe Kasia, you can just very briefly in 30 seconds, just tell us a little bit about your film and where people will be able to watch it and what the timeline is for that.
Sure. So 1.5 Degrees of Peace looks at the intersection between the climate crisis, conflicts, and militarism, but from a character-driven perspective of young people living at the nexus of these issues. And the way that they're breaking down the silos between these two movements. We are currently in production, so COP27 will be one of the production shoots. And we are planning a few more in the new year through 2023. If all goes well with production, by this time next year, we hope to have the film screening at festivals, with community organizations, with government stakeholders, and in educational institutions. So 1.5 Degrees of Peace. .com spelled out with the words and the numbers. I can somehow get it out there, but that's where you'll find us. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Kasia. Did anyone else want to weigh in on the question we had from our friend in Indonesia?
Michael, maybe I can just say a couple of words. So, I mean, I talked earlier about renewables and the potential of those, and the trailblazing that we've seen in Kenya, but also in many other countries around the world, and the ambitious targets, for example, set by India and so on. And we know that the price of these technologies is falling faster actually than experts had anticipated. Critical elements in this are getting the policy framework right and getting the flow of financing right. And there's more work to be done on both of those. But the note on which I wanted to kind of close out really was that in this whole debate, we need to put people at the center. And a couple of days ago, I was at the Ashton Awards here in the UK, which is a celebration of kind of community-focused climate action. And we had a number of winners there who had delivered renewable energy projects for the community, empowering and transforming the lives, for example, of refugees or farmers or communities in DRC and other places around, around Africa. And it demonstrated how renewable energy isn't just good for the planet, but actually it can bring energy to those who don't have access and can transform people's lives in a really, really positive and empowering kind of way. And so acting on this is not just good for the planet, it can be good for people, but we need to go much faster, much harder, and we need to see money flowing into those community-based solutions so that people can really take control of their lives and both kind of have a better prospect and greater security for their own personal futures and their families.
Thanks, Mozam. Stig, I see you've got your hand up. We are out of time, so if 30 seconds, no less, if you want to weigh in very quickly.
Yeah, just to agree with Mozam when it comes to the importance of finance, and then maybe point out that there are differences in the finance you need for large-scale renewables, and in order for off-grid, especially in Africa where people don't have access. So there you need innovative financing schemes to really jump over the fossil stage straight to renewables. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our tremendous panelists. You've been incredible. And just to Mozam's point around the role of people and citizens, and also his earlier point on accountability, a big part of what this global town hall is about is equipping us with all the knowledge so that we can ask the questions, we can follow the details, and we can follow up. And really force this change about, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us has a role to play, and just everyone wants to do something that potentially can make a difference. I saw this morning President Macron on his Twitter posted a video asking for questions ahead of COP. And so all of our participants, if you want, there's a great opportunity to post a video and potentially have it addressed by one of our world leaders. But I really want to thank all of our panelists. Again, really big shout out to all of our participants around the world. Download the Global Citizen app. Lots of ways to take action and be engaged. Thank you all.